We just heard Ruth reading the words attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of John where he says, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Abundant life. When he says that, there could be the impression that we don't all have abundant life yet. That's why he needs to bring it. So I start with asking you to consider, how would you describe your life? Some people say, life is good, life is great. Some, life is hard, a struggle, a challenge. Probably for most of us, it depends on the day or the time of day. Circumstances, situations, in terms of how would we talk about our own lives. So as Jesus says he comes to bring life and to bring abundant life, what sounds good, life is better than the alternative. Abundant life sounds better than scarcity life, fearful life, squished in little tiny small life. So what would it look like? How is it lived? What difference would it make, this abundant life? Well, the context for the abundant life conversation is backing up a bit in what we heard Ruth read earlier, that Jesus is talking about the kind of life we live is at least connected on some level with the voices to which we give our attention. We might say the kind of shepherds, to use the language from earlier and the language from Jesus. What's shepherding you? Who shepherds you? What are you giving your attention to? And as Jesus describes this, there's kind of a spectrum. That there is, on one side, the good shepherd voice, and on the other, the thieving voice that comes to kill and destroy. Now for Jesus, the good shepherd voice, we might say it's the voice or the energy, the Spirit of God. This is the voice, he says, that calls us by name, that is intimately connected with us, that knows deeply who we are. It's the voice that in the 23rd Psalm, the good shepherd leads you beside still waters and green pastures. Yea, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you don't need to be afraid. This is the shepherd of protection and care and fullness. So that's, we might say, the voice of God or the energy of God, the Spirit of God on this end. But then on the other end, what's this thieving voice? Comes to kill and destroy. Seems like we'd want to know what that is. So I'm thinking, well, what might be that voice here and now, or those voices? And these are voices around us, but they also get in us, right? We start to integrate and they become part of who we are. So I think about if the voice of the Good Shepherd is one that calls us by name, then one of the clues about the other voices is they don't. They call us things like consumer. Consumers say, consumers want. Or the voices that say, please on your telephone keypad, enter your 12-digit account number, followed by the last 4 digits of your Social Security. Hi, I'm here for my appointment. Birth date, please. So we have lots of those voices that don't really see who we are or acknowledge us as persons. And then there are the voices that are calling out from the many, 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 many screens now that are in front of us all the time. And there's really no escaping them. I mean, we can hold them in our pockets and they're on our phones. But how many times you go in a restaurant now and there's something on the wall, right? It used to just be like that sports bar that had it. But now almost everywhere, so many places, the screens calling out. And these are often the images or ideas that come through those screens that call us to buy this thing or that thing. If you just own this, if you just have this, if you just drive this, everything's going to be all right. You'll be even more attractive and people will love you. Right? If you live in this place or you go to this school, if you just have these things or vacation here, everything is going to be all right. Life will be good. Or there are the voices that create an illusion of participation when we're actually just observers. Often, the voices of social media. I mean, sometimes they invite participation, but it's so easy to just share that meme or that thought and not actually have to engage anything. There, I did it. I did my job. I'm a social justice warrior. I posted this quote. Or even, sometimes it's cheering on our favorite team. Right? How many times are people like, we're number one? I'm sorry, you didn't go to the practices or move the ball down the field. Right? It creates the illusion, though, that we're doing it. And there's lots of things like that in ways kind of create and cultivate in us a passivity. And then, more challenging are the voices that some of us heard from our earliest days of neglectful or even abusive adults that say, you are not good enough, or you'll never amount to anything, or no one will really love you, or if someone seems like they do, they might just leave you behind. And these voices, collectively, they do get into us. And they are voices that call us to spend money that we don't have to buy things we don't need. They are voices that often diminish our sense of self and our capacities and our capabilities. They're voices that call us into passive ways of being instead of actively engaging in the world. They're voices that often keep us and our lives really small or selfish or fearful. And Jesus says, those voices, they are thieves that come to kill and destroy. And the reason he brings this up or shows this to us, and it connects back with the story we had in the beginning of Lent, where Jesus himself was sorting through the various kind of voices and messages, right? The ones that give life and the ones that don't. And so in this teaching, he's calling us to recognize these things get into us, they influence us, and we can say no. We don't have to just react and act based on those particular voices, saying, those take life away from you, and they keep you from really offering life to others. Those are the voices that have you wanting to build higher walls instead of bigger tables. They're the voices that make you and the world small and fearful and mean. So Jesus says, you don't have to do those voices. Don't listen to those voices. There's a better voice. It knows who you are. There's an energy that's already in you that calls you by name. And he uses this image then of the Good Shepherd, a very familiar image to the people in that time and place, not necessarily a familiar visual for those of us in Metro Tucson, right? Not a lot of flocks grazing here. So, but they would know it. It would be so intimately familiar. And how does a shepherd work with the sheep? The calling by name, the intimacy. And there's a sense of the still waters, the green pasture. That's a picture of you have all that you need. You're not in a place of fear or scarcity or diminishment. And so Jesus is teaching, calling people, and showing them the way to attune themselves more to that voice, that energy, that spirit that is available, that's already here, that's already present. And a lot of the spiritual practices we talk about are about engaging, tapping into that energy, that voice that knows the truth of who we are and empowers us to live it. That helps us tap into a life that Jesus is calling abundant, and it's a life that then overflows from us and becomes blessing, healing, helping to others. And then the question can be, well, how do you really do that? I mean, what's it really look like? Sometimes I recognize as we approach this Acts reading that I've been in groups with people saying, well, you know, those people had Jesus to literally follow around and hear his direct voice, right? Some guy walking the dusty streets who says, hey, let's go check this out, or go here. Or when you say something thick-headed like Peter often did, you get some feedback right away that calls you back to where you want to be. So how do you do it when there's not a physical Jesus walking around? Well, the whole story of Acts is about how the community does it without a physical Jesus walking around. The whole story is post-resurrection. The whole story is no more somehow bodily or embodied manifestation of Jesus. It's now the body of followers doing the Jesus stuff in the world. And they're living it, and they're doing it. And we get a little snapshot here in Acts chapter 2 of what does it look like, or how did they remember what it looked like in the early community of living into the life that Jesus called them into. So we hear them describing, well, they're devoted to the apostles' teaching, the prayers, the breaking of the bread. So the apostles' teaching would be now for us what becomes, we might call, Scripture and the stories. They remembered the parables of Jesus, or Paul writes these letters to early churches. And so there's a sense of they make it a priority to pay attention to that stuff. And prayers. And remember, prayer in the biblical sense is not just now I lay me down to sleep or Our Father who art in heaven on repeat. Prayer is what we might call conscious contact with God. Or prayer is tapping into the energy, the creativity of the divine. But it's a choice to do that, to connect with, to be moving with the Spirit. And Jesus says that people were to do that, and now we hear the community, we hear they're devoted to it. Devoted. This is a low-hanging fruit question I'm about to ask you. Are there any devoted fans of the University of Arizona Wildcats here. And what that usually means, though, is, right, they have my allegiance, they have my loyalty, I have lots of clothing with A's on them, right? And I'm not going to really cheer for that other team, and this is my focus, my attention is for and with that team. That's the word that's being used to describe how they're engaging this path of Jesus, devoted to it. Not like, when there's no other thing to do, or, only when I have time, but they are committed to wrestling with the stories and the teachings, committed to the things that will help them open to the divine spirit and energy and life and wisdom. And we hear that they're worshiping in the temple, and we hear that they're in fellowship, and there's breaking of the bread. And that piece is really important because it fits the image of flock. I mean, how often are there paintings of a hillside with just one sheep? Right? It's a flock. And that image matters because there's this idea of we are in it together. The best way, the best practices, so to speak, of following the path of Jesus is in community. We need each other to do this, to live this. And the breaking of the bread connects with something we talked about last week. There's this idea, of course, it has to do with sitting down and having some meals. But we recognize this may have become a shorthand in the early church for talking about the path of Jesus. That the breaking of the bread last week in the Emmaus story connected with the image of take, bless, break, give. That there's numerous stories. There's the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000, the Last Supper in several Gospels, and the road to Emmaus story. It says Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them. So they're devoted to the path of Jesus where we take what is, not deny it, not fight it. We just, here it is. This is life. This is what's doled out today from wherever it comes from. But then there's blessing. There's inviting God into it. There's awakening to God's spirit and presence and energy in the midst of it. And that when we do that, we're broken, open to new possibilities, new ways, new understanding, stretched, broken, open, and that is for the purpose of multiplying, just like the bread in those stories of the feeding of the 5,000. When we invite God in, we're broken open from our usual ways and our rigidity and the old patterns and paths that we knew, and then we're given as gifts to others, life multiplied. So abundant life isn't just, I feel it in me. It's something that I live with you, and we live with each other, and we live in the world. And we hear what it was looking like in the early church. And if we read it carefully, there's a lot of Christians who get really nervous about this because it sounds like communism. Right? Read the passage. I'm not saying Jesus is a communist. He's not aligning with some particular, political viewpoint or form of governance. But what he is committed to and what they're committed to is that when you are on the receiving end of God's abundance, you can't help but share. You can't help but care for those on the margins, those who are hurting, those who are seen as other or on the outside. It is a story where people aren't just giving what's left over or giving their extra. It says they're selling off stuff to take care of each other. Can you imagine what would be different if we were all, each of us, and more of us in this world, were on the receiving end of that kind of abundance, that kind of energy, that kind of life, and connected and collectively, that we're living in ways where we'd sacrifice things so the people most hurting, most struggling, instead of saying they're bad people or we're afraid of them, that we say, how do we take care of whomever it is that is hurting and struggling? How do we welcome? How do we include? That we don't create laws that make them feel ashamed or wrong or scared. We create systems and structures that are just and generous and joyful. That's what these folks are doing. That's what abundant life looks like. It can be hard sometimes, though, get my mind around the big picture, like change the world. That's a great vision, but it doesn't happen like that. So I was thinking about something really mundane. I got to visit this part's not mundane, I love visiting my son. I got to visit my son 2 weeks ago. He's in Washington, D.C., he's 24 years old. And in the midst of the visit and conversations, there's like stories, and right, where you get together with family, like remember this, remember that. So this particular thing I'm about to share was not a memory we talked about, but it just taps into my own memories of things. And I'd been pondering about what he's experienced from me, his mother, the world, how it informs and influences, for better and for worse, the ways he's operating in the world as an adult. What voices did he hear? What things did he learn? And how is he integrating those? And what does he let go of? And what does he hold on to? So I had this memory that was uncomfortable for me. It was a time when he was in probably late elementary school. And I was in a hurry to get somewhere, and he was coming along. I don't remember where we were going or what. But I don't really have to, because that is my modus operandi. That I am someone like, I must be to this place on time. And some of you had those coaches or those choral directors who say, if you're on time, you're late. That is this perfectionist voice in my head. And so it creates false senses of urgency for me. So I was in that mode, whatever it was. And my son, who needed to come with me, I'm calling, hurry up, hurry up. I'm in the garage. And he's not hurrying up. He is not doing what I want him to do. And that, as a parent, annoys us, right? But more importantly, we might be late. And so, after several reminders, and in my mind, he is on purpose going more slowly now, I use the bellowing dad's scary voice. Joshua Bradford Bush, get in here, from the garage. And his little face shows up right then in the door. And his eyes are wide. I got one thing I wanted, he was there. But I saw a look of fear on his face. And I knew in that moment, I do not want that. I do not want that. And I was thankful for some of the ways I've walked this path of Jesus, and I caught it. I am listening to the wrong voices. These are voices that thieve, that kill, that destroy, that take life away. And I, giving into that voice, just did that with my son. And I did one of the shortest prayers I know. I took a deep breath in and out and said, help. And I looked at my son. I said, Joshua, I do need you to do what I'm telling or asking you to do, but my reaction, my response to you was uncalled for. And I'm just anxious about my own stuff, and I'm sorry I did that. Will you forgive me? And he looks at me and he says, yes, Dad, I forgive you. And then he said, I'm sorry I didn't come faster. I was just selfish. I wanted to finish my thing. Will you forgive me? I said, yes, I forgive you. And there was a little picture of abundant life. I was operating in scarcity and fear. I was contagiously putting that on my son, scarcity and fear. But there was this moment of tapping into a better energy, a deeper wisdom, a higher power. And then there was forgiveness and reconciliation, and hope rises. So this is the path we're called onto. Jesus came that we would have life and have it abundantly. And that we become given as bread, as life, abundant life for a world that needs more justice and joy and generosity. Come and see. Amen.